Hello, world, and welcome to the Innovation Coaching Podcast. My name is Klaus Rostel, and with me today, I have Livia Ivanovici. Livia, tell me how I can help.
Hi, Klaus. Very glad to be here after listening to your podcast, which I think is amazing.
Thank you.
Well, I think we should start with something that I liked very much in other podcasts, but I'm not sure how it applies to me, which is I'm a 38 years old white female who has a lot of experience, but is not believable as such, tried with a lot of fails. And this a lot of experience comes from the fact that I studied architecture for 6 years, and along all that time, I've been working as well in an architecture magazine where I didn't do just journalism. I learned that as well. But we had a lot of project management, event management, a lot of stuff. So I've been with them for 10 years, 6 during university and then afterwards. And I've learned a lot from how to create a budget to how to create a financing application and, of course, implement it successfully. And among other things, I did experience design without knowing that existed. And then I created my own startup, actually 2 startups since 2017. And I've been failing and succeeding, having both an interior design startup, which paid the bills, and an experimental startup, which now is about showing the value, the real value that architecture brings to the world and to the business. And there I failed a lot before I managed to create at least 2 products that are sellable with success.
Nice.
One of those projects is a class on negotiation and communication for architects, which I sold in Romania, and I need to sell also abroad. Maybe that's something we can tackle as well, because I can do it in English, that's no problem. And from that one, I realized that I needed also coaching as a follow-up, so I can really help people. So I started also training as a coach. But now at the end of all this, when I say that I'm a coach and I'm a 38 years old, good-looking female, discussions on executive coaching tend to stop there. I don't dress up as an architect necessarily. I'm more a leisure kind of dress etiquette, and that's what suits me. If I need to be elegant, I am, but not in a casual setup or in a casual business meeting. That's my first challenge for today's session.
That's the first challenge. Okay, let's start there. And first, let's start by acknowledging the fact that the world is terrible. Lots of the world is nice and wonderful and full of amazing people, but there are some structures in place that we rarely see but are terrible. And one of those structures is the one that says, because you are a nice-looking 30-year-old white female, you are very believable in some ways, and you are very unbelievable in others, regardless of what you actually know and what your skill set is. Just like I, as a 44-year-old middle-aged white man, there are some things people think I know nothing about, and other things they think I know a lot about. And your challenge, or at least part of it, is that you'd like to do one of these things that people don't think you can do simply because of who you are. And add Romania to that, and that makes it even harder, right? When I go out and say I'm from Denmark, then people go, oh, Denmark, Danish design, and oh, Michael Laudrup, and oh, Maersk, Novo Nordisk, whatever they say, right? Denmark is a pretty nice place to be from for some kinds of business. For others, it's not that good. If I say, I'm an expert at building huge companies that make a lot of money, they say, your accent is American, but didn't you say you were from Denmark? And then I'd say, no, no, forget Denmark. Listen to the American accent. And they're like, oh, we hear the American accent. And Romania, let's be honest, is sadly not known for its executive female business coaches. And that means that you're up against female, you're up against nice looking, you're up against Romania, and you're up against 38. If you were 62, it would be easier. If you were from New York, it would be easier, right? If you lived in New York, even that would be easier. So how do we deal with this circus? Because changing the world is a big, long process, and we can fight the current some of the time, but we can't fight it all the time. So how do we do something about that? Well, the first question is, what if you did something else? And this is a terrible question. That's why I ask it. What if you said, forget about that. I'm going to do something else. I'm tired of swimming upstream. It's too much work. What is it about coaching executives that is the dream, or that is the goal? Like, could you coach anybody, or does it have to be coaching, or like, what is it? Why is it that this modality, this format appeals to you?
First of all, I'd like to say that it's not only coaching, it's also creating very good workshops, valuable workshops on innovation.
Sure.
And also innovation strategy for businesses.
Sure. But you run into the same problem.
Yes, more human-centric design on this.
Yes.
And I would not like to do anything else. I did it already. I started with saying that I'm a communication specialist. And I did end up with some clients which are not my dream clients. I was believable in communication. That was great. And I also added the fact that I was an architect, and I went to my industry, to architects and also to engineers, and they liked that they had someone who understood the sector and who knew communication and also journalism and everything, and project management. But the clients that I landed were not good clients, or I don't know how I could have done the transition better towards executive coaching or innovation workshops. And when I say they were not good clients, they were not the best paying.
Oh, but there are many ways to be good clients, because I was thinking something completely different. So it's good you said that.
There's one more thing. There were clients where they wanted a communication strategy, but they didn't have a management strategy. So difficult to do communication where you don't have a management strategy. And even though I did convince them to do some form of hybrid workshop for a full day, where we did get more clear. We were more clear on where we were going, at least for a short period of time, but also with goals for a long period of time. They don't have the internal resources to do better management. So it doesn't stick, basically. That's another way of saying that they were not my clients, my kind of clients. And coming back to your question, why executive coaching? That is because my vision is to make value of architecture visible in the business world. So executive coaching is a means to this end as well. Is one of.
Got it. Okay, so let's unwrap this a little bit. So the first thing is that because of life as it is, it's not easy to just go out and say, here's what I'm doing and I'm good at it. And then people say, yeah, let's have more, whoever you are, stranger. You said something at a moment before that made me smile. You said you did these negotiation workshops for architects and they were popular. No wonder, right? Because there you're speaking to people you know, you have deep expertise, you understand them, they understand that you understand them, because you say, I'm a trained architect, I also understand business, and I'm doing negotiation workshops for architects. And that worked, right?
Yeah, it did.
Yes. And there are a couple of reasons that it worked, or a couple of reasons that at least that sort of thinking works, is that one, you're playing to a strength. but not exclusively, right? You're playing to the architect's strength. You're not necessarily super believable as a strong negotiator. It's not like I spent 20 years with the FBI as a hostage negotiator, and now I teach workshops, but you have the skill set. But you are strong as an architect, so they understand you understand them. Very important. Number two, you made it specific, where if you say, I teach negotiation, okay, or if you say, I teach negotiation for architects, then suddenly you're slimming down your target audience, but you're also becoming much, much clearer to that target audience. And doing both of these at once, pretty smart move. Where here, you're now in a little bit trouble where you're saying, I'd like to do executive coaching, which, by the way, what the hell is that? Because is that like, that could be anything, right? It's not negotiation for executives or recruiting for executives or public speaking training for executives, right? It's not specific, it's general, and that makes it much harder to sell, even though there's more potential. The second is that the reason they should believe you is hard to find, and your own goal, which is you want to teach them about architecture and the value for business, is not apparent to them, right? So we have, where the other one, we have 2 pluses, and here we have 3 minuses. Where if you said, I teach, I coach executives, and what I teach them is how architecture is used in business, then you'd have a much, much smaller interested group, but they would at least say, oh, wow, I want that, right? And I think here you've gotten a bit too broad, and B, your goal is a little bit obscure. It's a beautiful goal. I like that, but there's no clear connection between I do executive coaching and my goal is to make people understand the value of business and architecture. That's not a clear connection. Where I'm sure you can connect it, yeah, but it's not necessarily clear. So it doesn't, they'd have to do a little bit of thinking to get to that. And also, they're not saying, oh, but she looks like an executive coach. So you're up against several hills you have to climb at the same time.
I was very glad when you said that there's a connection between business and architecture, and to make visible how architecture is of good use to business. And I wanted to build up on that because I actually had that in mind as well. Another goal I have is to put the mindset of an architect, to translate it into business. Because an architect can also create strategy for businesses, just like he creates very reliable, very durable buildings that create a lot of value in the city and in the community. Of course, I'm talking about great architecture, not any kind of architecture. Because I worked in a magazine for 10 years who was celebrating the greatest architecture. So I have the virus.
I like that. And I think that there we might have something like that, because if I was your business coach, right? If that's what I was doing, let's imagine for a moment that I had the license to give you advice and you could ignore it or not, but at least you'd listen. Then I'd say, you know what I hear, Livia? I hear that you might be somebody who could go out and say, I run a workshop called Think Like an Architect, a workshop for CEOs. And it comes in 3 forms. There's a 3-hour half-day version, there's a full-day version, and there's a 3-day version. And I also give talks that are called Think Like an Architect, New Thinking, Different Thinking for CEOs. And I also coach CEOs on how to use architectural thinking in their business. And you've worked 10 years at an architecture magazine. You're a trained architect that understands business. And you're 38 and you're a white woman. And suddenly now you're pretty believable. And suddenly you're somebody with deep expertise. And suddenly you're not an executive coach that has to compete with somebody who spent 16 years at McKinsey and is 64 and has 1,000 suits that he flies around with the world in. But you're somebody who spent 10 years at an architecture magazine that celebrates great architecture, and you're somebody who understands the business side of things, and you're somebody who teaches people how to link those worlds. And just in the title of your offering, which is Think Like an Architect, Training for CEOs who want that extra edge, now suddenly they're saying, oh, I want that. or at least some of them will, right? And they're not going to think she can't teach that. They're going to think, of course she can do that. That she sounds like the right person for that, or at least one of them, hopefully. And they're going to think either I want that or I don't want that. They're not going to think I don't know what that is. And suddenly you're not going to have to worry about what are you trying to do and what are you calling it and is it this or is it that, because you're saying exactly what you want to do. And when somebody asks you, why do you do this, Livia? You say, well, my mission, my big passion is to get people to understand the power of architecture in business. So I run workshops called Think Like an Architect, and it's training for CEOs. And suddenly you go from being a little bit kind of diffuse, a little bit opaque, a little bit unclear, but passionate, to being crystal clear and hyper-focused. Now, will people want it? Who knows? We can only find that out by testing, but it's at least now completely clear what you do. It's clear to the people who are buying, it's clear to you, it's clear to friends, it's clear to people you meet randomly, and either they'll go, oh, wow, that's cool, or they'll go, okay, I don't want that at all. And in my experience, that's a pretty good way to at least grow your business or watch it fail fast. Where the hard part isn't that things fail, because of course they do. The hard part is this struggle, a little to the left, a little to the right. What am I doing? What am I not? Where the moment you ask somebody, do you want to marry me? Then there are two options, yes or no. And it can be hard to recover from no, but it's pretty nice if they say yes. It's rare where somebody says, well, I don't know, what does it mean? And does it have to be Thursday? And what do you even mean? Blah, blah, blah. It's a clear yes, no. But getting to that yes, no is not that easy. And I see a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of freelancers struggling with that, getting people to that yes, no, that either makes them go, wow, I like that. Tell me more, or okay, good for you, but I don't need to hear more. Does it make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and I am so glad this is recorded. And I'm so glad we are making this, because I just want to test it.
See, that's then let's talk about that for a moment, because now we have a plan, right? Now we have a thing. How do you test it? Let's do a little bit of future thinking. Let's say that you have 20 people who've signed up for the workshop and they've paid. What have they paid? What does a workshop cost? What would you like a workshop, like a half-day workshop? Just some number.
I'm gonna go backwards a little bit,
Sure.
because I think there's a mindset shift I need to be making, because the workshops I've done before for a different audience, not business leaders, where you kind of do free workshops first. But I kind of have the feeling that here it doesn't go with like that, with free workshops first. Maybe with very discounted first time, one time only, but not free. So for a 20, how many people you said?
20 people. Yeah.
Okay, that would be my maximum anyway.
Yep.
And I think I would start with 10.
Let's start with 10. Let's start with 10, right? Let's make it super specific and concrete. Start with 10 people.
What if I say I don't know?
That's good.
How do I know that the price is believable for my target audience?
Now you're asking the right questions, because you're not asking. First, you need to ask, what makes you happy? What price will make you happy to spend that half day with them? And if you say 16 euros, then I'm going to say, okay, that's less than I expected. And if you say 80,000, then I'd say, okay, cool. Could you be happy with maybe 70? Right? So there's a range of what you find is okay. And let's start by looking at that. It's a half-day workshop, it's 10 people. What is a number where if you get that number, then you're like, that's good. And for some people, that number is 60 euros. For some, it's 600. For some, it's 6,000. For some, it's none of those. What's a good number for a half-day's workshop with you?
I would start, because it's the first one, and I'll say it's discounted, one time only, or two time only. I don't know. I'll think about that. I would say I would start with 80 euros and go until 200. That would be the margin
Good, good, good. So then let's say, is this per person or in total?
per person.
Good, but that's a good question to ask, right? So let's say that let's say somewhere between, let's say 125 euros. And that means it's 10 people, 125 euros. So that means that total, you're going to get 1,250 euros for a half-day workshop. That sounds like a nice amount of money.
And I think you multiplied. I mean, it's 110,
Yeah.
1,000.
Got it. 1,000. Sure. Sure. So it's 1,000. Sure. 1,000. I had a wrong number. So you walk away with 1,000 after a half-day workshop, and 10 people have paid 100 each to be there.
For me, it's okay, but it's okay as a test workshop.
Sure.
And let me say why. Because the biggest amount I took until now was 2,000 for a one-day workshop.
Okay.
For me, the amount of work for a half-day workshop is pretty similar as a one-day workshop, because it's complicated to fit everything in, and you need to make a good design nevertheless.
Sure.
But I do wonder if that is not too little for my target audience again.
But that's good, because then let's say 2,000 then, right? So 2,000 for 10 people, and that means they pay 200 each to be there. Or you get some company to pay you 2,000 and then they bring 10 people. But I think this one will be most easy to sell as like piecemeal, because not everybody has 10 CEOs that they want trained, where you can get CEOs from 10 different companies or leaders from 10 different companies if it's that way. So let's say it's 200 euros is the price tag, because that means after half a day, you will walk away with 2,000 euros. Very nice. Now, the next question is this expensive enough for the audience you want to attract? That's a really good question. And that depends on where is that audience? Who is that audience? Who are you going for? If you say 200 euros, then there are some people who will look at it and say, oh, that's a great price. I want to go there. And some people will say, oh, that's too cheap. That's not serious. And others would say, whoa, that's way too much. We can't afford that. And anywhere in between. So it's also a matter of who do you want to hit? If you say the price is not 200 per person, but 549, you're going to reach a different group of people, but you're also going to have a group of people say, that's not possible, that's too much. But you're going to have some people who before said you were too cheap say, oh, that's reasonable. And you'll still have some people say, oh, that's too cheap. The higher you put the price, the more people will, not the more, but a different sort of people will say it's too cheap or too expensive, but you're going to have it no matter what. If you put it at 8 euros, then some people would say that's too expensive, I'd buy it at 6. And others would say that's ridiculous, I wouldn't go if it was less than 1,000. But no matter where you are going to scare away some people and appeal to others. Now, the trick is that while there are people at every level, there are more people who can afford 200 than 500. And there are more people who can afford 500 than 2,000. And there are more people who can afford 2,000 than 5,000. On the other hand, if you want 2,000, then if you're selling at 200, you need to sell 10. If you're selling it at 2,000, you need to sell 1. So then with that in mind, we get to the phase where we say, okay, who do you want to sell to and who knows you already? If we're looking to start, right? We're not saying this is what it needs to cost in 3 years, but we're looking to do the first workshop and we'd like to have 10 people to pay. And now we look at who do you know? Who could you call or send a LinkedIn message in 5 minutes saying, I'm testing a new format. It's called Think Like a CEO or Think Like an Architect. It's training for CEOs. It's a half-day workshop. It's the 18th of June and the price is 100 euros. How many people do you have right now you can write to where you think there's a realistic chance they'll say, okay, sounds good. Where it doesn't really matter if you have people, if you know that some people would say yes to it, but you don't know them. Or, yes, we can find people who'd pay 5,000, but if you don't know any of them, it doesn't matter.
That's actually a challenge, because I have owners of small businesses mainly in my network, and I'm not sure they would pay. I have some connectors in my network, to whom I could send this message and ask, can you pay it forward to anyone interested? But yeah, it's different from the communication and negotiation class. There I had in my network a lot of people who were in the target audience.
Mm-hmm.
And actually by talking with them, I created that product because I understood their needs. Here I don't have, or at least I'm not seeing them maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I have some, but I don't have 10 people I could, or maybe 20 people at least. So you would have at least 5 yeses, let's say, to whom I could send it. And moreover, I am not sure I have international people.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do when you don't have
Ah.
a straightforward answer to your question?
So there are rarely straightforward answers, right? But that is still a really good answer because it says that then we need to take the reverse approach. Because if you said here, you talked to the target audience before, you found out what they needed, you created a workshop that fit them, and of course they bought it. And then you could do it again. That's great. But here you're saying, I want this. You're not responding to a need, you're responding to your own wish, which means you're not trying to solve a need, you're trying to sell art. Right? You might just as well do a painting and say, here's this painting, I'd like to sell this painting. And then somebody says, okay, nice painting. What does it cost? And then you say it costs 6,000 euros. And then they say either great, or they say, it's a bit much, or they say, oh, that's way too cheap. I thought you were a serious artist. Same. But it's very important to know the difference between selling to a need or selling because you're producing art you'd like somebody else to pay for. And that means you need to kind of figure out with yourself, how long are you willing to spend on getting to the point where the thing you created because you wanted it gets sold at the price you want, right? Are you willing to compromise? And if not, how long are you willing to be uncompromising?
What if I wouldn't start following on what you said? I just got an idea.
Go.
What if I would launch some kind of, I don't know, study, but that's too much to say. A very short, max 10 questions, very simple to answer to
Sure.
a study that would have a target audience, the ones that I want to bring to my workshops. And it would be a far lesser ask, a smaller ask.
Yes.
That also people in my network can distribute forward.
Yes.
In this way, I could also research, which I'm very good at researching and turning research into good products. I don't have an MVP now, so maybe I should start with that.
Maybe that's also a way. And I think what you need to at least decide is, what approach are you taking? Are you taking the solve the business approach, which is doing research, figuring out what do people want or dream of, and then trying to help them? Or are you doing the art approach, which is saying, this is what the world needs, and I've told you, and now my goal is to make you understand that I'm right. And both of those have value. Both of those are fine, but they're not the same thing.
I'm that architect, actually, who goes with the research approach always. But I was not aware that this time I'm on the artist approach. It just hit me when you told me now. And that's very valuable in itself. So thank you.
And I love that. Don't get me wrong. I love that. Thank you for that. But I love that approach of saying, I think the world needs this, and I'm giving it to the world in this package. Would you please accept my gift? Oh, and also I'd like you to pay for the gift in this way. And that's definitely doable. And the nice thing is that it's crystal clear, right? It's this painting. It's not I paint. It's this painting. It's this price. It's this thing. Please buy it. The tricky thing is that when somebody says, yeah, but I don't want to think like an architect, then you have a very weak case if you say, but I think you should. Where if you instead say, okay, what do you want to learn? Then it's a very different thing. And I think here that you're onto something that you have, but I think it would be smart to at least decide to yourself, are you doing the research-based problem-solving approach? Or are you doing the artistic, I want to bring this into the world, and then I will fight to have people understand why it's valuable?
I want to do both.
Yes, of course.
So I wouldn't do the research in order to discover another way, another kind of workshop. I would do the research to understand what needs those business people have that can be covered in the kind of think like an architect workshop. Because I do have a few ideas that come from my experience in the real world, but I don't feel I have enough.
Mm-hmm.
So I would search for what needs they have in their businesses, very as concrete as possible needs, that I can then address with how you can solve those by thinking like an architect, and why would that bring you more value in your business than how you are thinking already.
I think if we flip that a little bit, there is an interesting opportunity, because if you right now, if you say, what are your business problems? Then I'll tell you how you can solve them with thinking like an architect. That may make sense to you, but that reminds me of in the old days when I had a role-playing company and I said, what are your problems? Let me tell you how role-playing can solve that. And that was a very hard sell. Where some of my friends who run a change management company, and they've been very, very successful. They said, we do change management and board games are our method, but we're not selling you the board game, we're selling you the change management. Board games are just our model or our kind of way of doing it, our format. Where here, if you're saying, the problem here is if you're saying to somebody, say to me, right, you're saying, Klaus, what do you struggle with as a business owner? And then I say, well, we struggle with this and this and this and this. And you say, great, here's how thinking like an architect can help you. And if I'm not already thinking that architects can help me, I'm not going to be convinced by you. Or if you instead say, Klaus, what would you as a business owner like to learn from architects? Then I'd say, oh, I was just at Bjarke Ingels' talk the other day, and one of the things I admire about architects is their ability, or at least Bjarke is a brilliant one, right? But their ability to say, here are 7 different things we're trying to solve for, and how do we create a space that not just solves 4 of them, but all 7? And how do we keep on in the idea phase until we find an idea that fits all 7? That's something that stuck with me that he said in a talk I heard years ago. He said, we had this very complex situation and there were 14 problems, and the architecture needed to solve all 14, and we couldn't just do 12 and then the 2 others were forgotten, which very often in business that there are 8 problems something needs to solve, and then we take 2 of them and then the rest we ignore or they're half bad. And that dedication to the idea phase is something I would like to learn from architects. So if you said, what if your survey instead, your like test questions out there to these people are, what would you like to learn from architects? Then you can take those results and you can look at, okay, they want to learn this, or they probably don't want to learn how to sell, but they might want to learn how to think big or design small, or I don't know what they want to learn, right? But, and then you would have some data that says, okay, so of the 100 people who answered, 80% of them want to learn how to talk like an architect. And then you suddenly have what the workshop is about. Because then it's not think like an architect or sell like an architect or draw like an architect, a workshop for CEOs. Then it's talk like an architect. And then 80% of them will say, oh, that's exactly what I wanted. And that'll make it hopefully a little bit easier to get at least some of them to go to that first workshop. Where I think the problem is right now that you've decided, which I like, the artist approach, they need to think more like architects. And then the next thing is you want to go out and ask them, why do you need to think like architects? And the reality is some of them will say, I don't. But what you want is to catch the ones who do, who just didn't know it until you said it. And I like that survey approach, that asking them something as a way for further conversation, because it's a smaller ask. And if you do that, if you get a survey running with 100 people, then there's a big chance that some of those who answer, if you take what they wanted, then there's a much easier second conversation. The reason this podcast came into being is because I thought I want to do a podcast, but I have some ideas. So I threw up a poll and said, here are 4 ideas for podcast formats that I would like to do. All 4 of these are ones that I'd like to do. And the one that got most votes, 36%, was live coaching as a podcast. And that meant that out of those, I don't know how many answered it, but some, that out of those, there's a pretty good chance for when I came out and said, ta-da, I'm doing exactly what you said you wanted out of these 4, that some of them would say, yeah, I didn't like any of the 4, but this one was the least bad. They're not going to listen anyway, but some of them probably said, oh, wow, I want to listen to that. So I had at least a pretty good chance of having some beginning listeners because I'd done exactly what you suggested. And I think the tricky thing there is I didn't ask people, do you want to podcast with me? I asked them, if you have to have one, what would you prefer? If you had to learn from an architect, what would be the thing that you'd like to learn most is a very different question from, do you as a business owner want to learn from architects? Where most will just say, no. And some will say, yeah.
Yeah. I want to know the answers to that question of what would you like to learn from an architect? And also what, as a different question, separate time to ask, what do you admire about architects?
Yes, and now we're talking, right? Now we're talking, because then the people you get to answer are the ones who do admire something, because else they wouldn't answer. And it teaches you something valuable, what it is that might be what you think. It might also be something completely different. And it opens up for these future conversations, because now you're not doing the sales. Their admiration of architects is doing the sales. You're just the vessel for it. So you're not trying to ram down your expertise that's camouflaged in the form of a 38-year-old woman from Romania that they're resisting. You're instead saying, do you admire architects? Yes. What do you admire? Well, I admire how they think big, or how they solve all problems at once, or how they are so great with words or visions, and say, great, I do a workshop that teaches you how to do that in your business. And then suddenly it's like, oh, that's interesting. Because you're letting the architecture and the architects, their love of architecture, admiration, you're letting them do the sales work instead of you.
And what should I put on my LinkedIn as the first description to also match this new adventure, which is new but old for me? It's just new to the outside world, because I always struggle with that. Now it's a mix of everything I've done, and I don't feel it's anything very nice or very appealing.
What if it said, Livia, I teach CEOs how to think like architects?
Okay.
We'll see, right? Will it work? Will it resonate? Will people want to say, oh, that sounds interesting? Or will they just think, okay, that's weird. I like better when she was a product manager, right? We'll find out. But it's at least it's easy to test. And maybe, and I think you're onto something. I don't know, but I think you're onto something.
I am onto something, of course. We'll see how it will turn out.
We'll see how it will turn out. And that brings us to the rounding up. And that consists of 2 parts. The first part, most important part, is to say, Livia, thank you for bringing this to me. Thank you for not only sharing your challenges with me, but also with the world. That takes courage and generosity. Thank you for that. The second is take a moment and think of 3 things you take away from our conversation here.
Well, the first one is that I'm very grateful for you being my business coach for this 45 minutes. It's been very valuable to me.
Thank you.
For stuff that I've been pondering by myself for some time. So you saved me a lot of time, which is also valuable, of course. The second one that I take with me is that I will update my LinkedIn. So probably when you will hear this podcast, you will not see what I had before. You have to get to know me to know that and come to my workshops. It will be, I teach CEOs how to think like an architect. And the third one is I already have a plan, or the start of the plan. I will ask the 2 questions. What do you admire architects for? And the second one I forgot, but this is recorded. It's good.
What would you like to learn? We talked about at least.
Okay.
Yep.
Probably I'll have more ideas after I sleep on it, but I'll decide on probably 3. And then I'll see if the people who responded to that will also be part of my first workshop. And if not, I'll try a different approach because I'm not gonna, this is what I want, and I'll make it work one way or another.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I look forward to hearing how it goes and following from the sidelines. And who knows, if the timing is right, I'd like to learn how to think like an architect because because there's something there. And I love that. I love that way of doing it. I talked with somebody recently where we talked about they need to teach their salespeople how to think like consultants.
Mm.
Because that's a different thing from selling products, selling consulting services. It's different kind of mental game. They said, okay, so that's what we want. And here so I like that. Just wanted to share that as a personal thing is I think you're onto something and I look forward to seeing it come alive in whatever form it ends up taking. To the people out there, all of you listening, thank you for listening in on our conversation. This has been the Innovation Coaching Podcast. You have heard Livia Ivanovici and me, your host, Klaus Hostel. Thank you for listening.